ask you, there was a question that came in for you that the theme was repeated quite a lot, and that is around the states working with the federal government to roll out these foundational supports. People are feeling quite nervous about whether the states are actually going to deliver on foundational supports. So, firstly, can you talk to us about your confidence in that, or lack thereof, and also when the federal and state governments have until to respond to the review and their recommendations?
Okay. Why don't I start with Ellie's points, and then I'll go through Nihal and Michelle's points. First of all, good afternoon, and thanks for putting on the weather. And hello to everyone online as well. The states are crucial to the future of disability in Australia. When we created the NDIS, all of us, you, me, Bruce, Kirsten, all of us, it wasn't meant to be a replacement for other support, but it was about providing individual packages of support to people with the greatest need. What's happened in the last decade, in essence, is it became the answer to everything and the excuse for doing not enough in other areas of disability. So this review was always, I guess, going to happen eventually, provided we've got the right government in place, which we have. And what we want to do is improve the experience within the NDIS for participants, but it can't be the only lifeboat in the ocean, because eventually it gets swamped. And it can't be the excuse to not do enough in early years, childcare, or the school system, community mental health, public transport and accessibility and design. So what was so significant about the review at the end of last year was that it came the day after this meeting of what's called National Cabinet. As Bruce described it, that's a meeting of all the premiers, including Roger Cook and the Prime Minister. And there was a bit of a breakthrough. Everyone, all those premiers are interested in what happens with disability. And what happened was that the states committed to increase their share of funding the NDIS from 2028. Now, without sort of boring you to tears, this should be an important reassurance for you. If you are cynical and sceptical, and maybe you sort of hear governments make promises and think, well, I'll believe it when I see it. The point about this agreement was that at the moment, when the states make an annual contribution to the NDIS, and it increases by 4% every year. The problem is that the costs within the NDIS have been growing faster than that. So increasingly the Commonwealth pays a greater share because they have to pay for the rest of it. So what's that meant is it's more like the Commonwealth paying 68 to 70% of the NDIS and the states paying a declining share. So it was really significant the states said they will increase. So they'll now increase what they pay to what they paid last, in a year, plus an 8% growth factor. So what that means is the states are committing in the future from 2028 to essentially pay billions of dollars more into the NDIS. Now the beauty of that isn't the fact that they're paying it, although that's nice. It means that the states now have some skin in the game to not see the cost of the scheme keep going up and up. See, what happened in the last 10 years is, the state governments are nice people, but it was all care, no responsibility. Now they have to pay more to the NDIS itself. They then have a very good reason to invest outside the scheme. So that's a sort of, you don't have to take my word for it, it's just they're committed to more funding. So that provides a real world incentive to contribute more. Now, leaving aside that sort of negative reason why you shouldn't worry, why the states are more engaged, the more positive reason is that there's genuinely, for the first time I've seen in years, all the states and the Commonwealth are trying to understand what currently happens. And to be fair, the states are doing a range of services, but it now means that we've started working on what foundational supports look like. And this review is a bit of a blueprint. So the fact that the states have also said they want to contribute to foundational supports means they recognise there's a need to do more. Now, I'm not going to insult anyone's intelligence. We're still a long way off the perfect world. But it does mean that the states positively are working on, with the federal government, foundational supports. And in addition, they're on the hook to pay more to the scheme, which also gives them another reason to focus on foundational supports. So I believe that, but it's up to all of us to keep everyone honest in the system. And the other thing which I would say is that there's plenty of stuff in the review which is conditional on the development of foundational supports. So the review and the government's giving itself years to change some aspects of the scheme, because there's a legitimate anxiety that people say, well, the NDIS mightn't be perfect, but it's better than what we had, and we don't want to lose what we've got. So I get the importance of developing foundational supports, and there's a long runway to develop foundational supports, but that means that there's a runway on a range of the other changes before they're fully implemented, because we've got to see the foundational supports emerge. So I hope I haven't sort of overly confused you, but there's three things going on there. Some of the review implementation will be done in years, not days, partly to grow the foundational world. Two, there is hard work going on right now about what foundational supports means. And three, the states have committed to extra funding in 2028, but that still means we've got the states agreeing to give more money to the scheme, which means they have that incentive to build accessibility. So I view the development of the NDIS. The NDIS is fantastic. I mean, it can be a lot better, but it's amazing development compared to the rest of the world. But now this stage is we're having the debate about what does an accessible and inclusive Australia generally mean. The NDIS wasn't for every Australian with a disability, but it's not the end of the journey to improve and create an accessible and inclusive Australia. We've got a long way to go. So I get the nerves, but it's also, again, it's a matter of just, we've got to keep people honest and on the straight and narrow, and that has ever been us. The other thing is, in terms of the response to the review, we're starting to get on with some of the responses now, and others will keep working with people, but the picture will become very clear by the second half of the year. But again, it's talking to people all the time, such as this forum and many others. I just want to go to perhaps some of the specific issues raised. The first one was about support coordinators and local area coordinators. There's a lot of well-meaning individuals and some good support, really good support coordinating work, but there's an equity issue going on. Not everyone has access to a support coordinator. And sometimes people have ended up working in disability without a lot of knowledge of disability. It's such a growing industry. So that's nice, they want to work in it. But knowledge isn't just acquired by, there's no magic pill to take and you know what all about. You take it and all of a sudden you know everything. It takes time and you've got to have consistent training. The whole NDIS workforce, and there's so many good people working in it, has developed a bit higgledy-piggledy though. There's people who last week might have been selling your Telstra phones, this week have, opened up and put up a new sign and opened up a shop and said, I'm now a disability service provider. So we really want to do a lot more, and that's the function of these navigators. We want to get some more consistency. A really excellent support coordinator is worth their weight in gold, but a really bad local area coordinator is a complete disaster. So we want, through the navigators, they'll still be independent businesses, there's going to be jobs for everyone who's working in the disability world today. I guarantee you one thing, there'll be jobs there tomorrow. But we want to get more consistency, more line of sight on what people are being told and the skills of those people providing advice. This is one of the big reasons why we're moving into a debate about registration. There are some genuine concerns by people saying, I don't want to lose the ability to directly hire or self-manage. You won't. You won't. That's just scaremongering. But we also you can't have a system where 15,000 service providers are regulated and 150,000 aren't. Forget for a moment the status quo. If we could invent a time machine and go back 10 years ago, we wouldn't have had this dual system. You'd have not clunky registration, which is all too often what happens. You wouldn't have the registration which is tick box fairy tales where you get the right auditor, you prepare your documents and you sail through registration. but you wouldn't have any idea if it's really happening on the ground. But by the same token, this idea that you've got hundreds of thousands of people delivering services, we don't know who they are, we have no visibility on quality, that doesn't happen in any other area of Australian life. You're not allowed to say we'll have 2 driving systems in Australia where those of you who can be bothered getting a driver's licence have one, but if you don't have one, well, that's okay. It's just not the way it goes. But I also get the legitimate concerns that the current registration system can be too clunky and is it measuring the right things? Is it too cumbersome? So we've got Natalie Wade and 3 other people working on, if we were to design a proper registration system, what would it look like? So that's us starting to implement that. But the question was raised about support coordinators. Not everything's the suburbs of Perth. What do you do in remote areas, First Nations communities, diverse communities? Well, we already have that problem now. They're not getting the support coordination and planning now. So we want to, we've got trials underway for alternative commissioning. We want to work off these strengths in local communities rather than just fly people in, fly people out. We're so committed to getting it right with First Nations people. We have a CEO, Rebecca Falkingham, a very talented woman, very committed. But we're creating a deputy CEO, First Nations. It's just a priority. And you've got to be the change you want to see. So we are prioritising how we best deliver services for First Nations people, for example, and in remote communities, by talking to First Nations people. I know this is not rocket science, but we're actually putting the resources behind it. And so I think that gives us a bit of a flavour of support coordination and what we want to do there. There was also the issue of shared supports. We're not going to create institutions again. If your needs are so significant that you need one-on-one care, that'll happen. But what we're also being clear is we think there's some inefficiency, and we do think that we can be more innovative in our housing options, and we do think also that the notion of sharing some supports makes sense. But the example, if you've got 3 people going in 3 different directions at the same time of day, well then obviously one person doesn't answer that. But we just want to not necessarily expect that one size fits all when it comes to delivering home and living supports. Again, there's a big issue where some of the supported in living people are now moving into getting around the demarcation between housing by renting head leases off, realestate.com and putting people into houses and sort of basically mining people for their resources, and we don't want that either. Again, everything I say about any side of the scheme, the vast majority of the scheme's doing a really good job. But if we don't fix up our own problems, we the people in the disability movement and people who care about the NDIS, sooner or later someone will come and fix it for us. So we've got to take ownership and just tell the truth. And there are some people who, not so much people on the scheme, but some service providers have seen the NDIS as a quick buck, government money, quick buck, make millions, sell their businesses. That's not on. If you're in this business just to make a profit and not care about, and make your profits okay, but if you're just in this business to look after yourself and make millions, you're really not welcome on the scheme. And that's why, for example, we've developed a new law, because one thing we are determined to get rid of is this dual pricing, this wedding tax notion in the scheme, where you go to some people and you say, I'm on the NDIS, all of a sudden the price of something goes up. I think that's an obscenity. And so we're making it illegal. And we intend to write to every person on the scheme and say it's illegal for you to be charged. The old thing, if you've got an appointment with an allied health professional, and again, most are fine. But, this idea, the scheme says I can charge you 90% if you cancel. But if you were just a person off the street going to a physio, you don't get charged 90% cancellation fee. We're going to stop that. If you're a business, you've got to treat people with disability the same as you treat all other customers and not view them as a chance to get rich quick. The other proposition about systemic advocacy, I know this answer will bug people. I'm not the minister in charge of funding systemic advocacy, But the Labor at the last federal election, we did promise to double the systemic advocacy funding, and we did. But I get that still doesn't meet the sides. The way we do it with the NDIA in my area is we accept that consultation means that there's a lot of advocacy which is sort of overwhelmed. There's almost consultation fatigue. Nothing about us without us is great, but if the nothing about us without us also means that you're preparing reports for 10 different agencies, that gets pretty hard. So certainly to the extent that I can, I'm very aware that systemic advocacy is valuable, should be nurtured. The truth of the matter is that I've spent my whole life being an advocate, a systemic advocate, as a trade union rep. You can try and fix individual matters, but it's a lot better sometimes to summarise the individual problems and put the changes so that you don't have to keep banging your head against the proverbial brick wall for each individual matter. So I'm trying to say there very clearly that I'm a fan of systemic advocacy, keeps the system honest, and I'll always be an advocate for better systemic advocacy funding. Michelle's point was about complexity. You need a PhD to understand the NDIS. It's a lot of jargon, and a lot of my colleagues who are federal MPs, they think they understand the NDIS, and then they get to the first issue, then the second issue, and so we really do need to try and make the processes transparent, as easy to understand. I get that there's been some comments about making even the review easier to read. We've been working on that. I think there's a general issue in Australia about accessibility and making things easier to understand. But I want the NDIA and indeed the other portfolios I've got, Service Australia, to be a leader and to get it right. The complexity is shocking. That's why us providing navigators will help every individual get the most out of the scheme and the most out of their community and life in their community. Because we all need a hand sometimes working it out. We all get overwhelmed from time to time. You've got different departments to deal with or different invoices coming in, different phone lines you're waiting on forever, different portals which you just want to throw a brick through the screen sometimes. And that's on a good day. And so we very much understand that getting that right, and that's why we're employing more people with disability in the agency. That's why we're employing more people in the agency. That's why we're also very committed to a lot of consultation. So we haven't got there yet, and I can't promise there won't be jargon. That very important issue that Michelle raised at the end is about the intersection between ageing family carers and what happens. That's actually what motivated me in part in my journey on disability when I was first elected to Parliament, when Kevin Rudd was Prime Minister and he put me into this area. I often thought, what do those parents do who are 80 and they're washing up the dishes at the end of the night, staring out over the window from their kitchen thinking who's going to care for their adult child the way they do? And that's not a paternalistic view, but that's just a legitimate midnight anxiety which some families have. This scheme is meant to help be a promise that we'll get through and that it'll be okay. But we've also got to be better at involving families in the scheme so that it's not just, I think sometimes I hear reports sometimes of planners almost putting the family in another room to the person with a disability. That's naive and it's not fair. Anyway, the way we will make sure it's there for you, Michelle, and for tens of thousands of other people is we try and get these reforms right. In the coming weeks and months, we'll put there won't be one day where all the laws change. We're going to put in some initial rules and laws, and then we're going to put in more in the second half of the year, and then we'll work with the states. But the thing motivating us, certainly the reviewers, people like Ellie, people like myself, is I want this scheme to be politician-proof in the future. And by that what I mean is it can't keep growing at 15%. It just can't. Sooner or later, people will kick up and say, oh, that's not right. But under what Labor's said, and we've even got the Liberals at this point to sign up to it, is we're targeting a growth rate of 8% per annum. There's no other government scheme in Australia where we're saying it can grow at that level. But we do need to make sure that we're delivering the right supports in this country to people with disability. If you don't need the full NDIS, well, then we'll give you the supports you do need. At the moment, it's all or nothing. So the real debate is, how do we make sure people aren't ripping off the scheme from some of the service providers? How do we make sure the schemes are more human, less traumatising experience, less bureaucratic? How do we also make sure that there's support for Australians with disability generally, so the scheme doesn't become the only lifeboat in the ocean? Thanks very much.
Thanks, Will. Can I, at this point, get you to thank all our panel members for their contribution? It's been great questions, and I appreciate the Minister's thorough answers. It's been a great
Is that
discussion.
code for I took too long?
A little bit, but that's
Okay.
fine.
Nothing like being told off by Ellie. Anyway.
Before all of you go this afternoon, I would love a little bit more information from you through the tool, and for those online through the chat. One is how you felt about today. We'd love you to answer some questions that we asked at the beginning. Whether you feel well informed, whether you support the findings, and one extra, whether you'd like to be involved in more discussions like today. And the other is just an open space for you to leave any feedback you'd like to tell us. I know today has been a lot to take in. My head is spinning.